Welcome, everybody. It's Max from Paper Gold and Common Ground Finds on Destination Unknown, episode 23. My friend in episode number 22, Nicholas Bazabane, sent me to the acclaimed writer, and I have a feeling we're going to have a relationship of friendship after this about books. And we are here with the author of the newest book coming out, or did it come out this week? Bradford Morrow. And
It's out this week. It's just out this week. Yeah.
I think it was the 14th it came out.
That was the official pub date. The launch is this coming Wednesday.
Okay, and talk to me about that. Let's start with that. Talk to me about a book launch. What does that entail for you?
Well, the book launch is basically there used to be readings. You'd have a reading and you'd invite friends and interested people would come and be at a bookstore. This is not unlike that, but it's the trend has moved more toward a discussion rather than the writer standing up and just reading some pages from the book and answering questions. So I'm lucky to have Nick Bazbane, in fact, as my interlocutor in this coming. So who better to talk about rare books and forgeries
and forgery, of course. I have a feeling that's why I got to you from him, because of A Gentle Madness and all those wonderful chapters in there.
Right. Yeah, well, so Nick will be there. It's a wonderful bookshop downtown New York called McNally Jackson Seaport. It's on 4 Fulton Street. Really one of the most beautiful bookshops in the city. And I'm not kidding. I love that place. They've done readings for conjunctions there too in the past. Anyway, so I may read just a couple of pages or something from the book, and it's more about the discussion. And then we'll open it up to Q&A, and then it's a launch because there will be a party afterwards with wine
and a book signing. I'm sure you'll sit at a table and
sure.
Hundreds and hundreds of books.
Well, I don't know hundreds and hundreds, but maybe I have to sign quite a few books tomorrow down at Otto Penzler's bookshop at Mysterious Press.
Are you doing a reading at Penzler's Mysterious?
No, not this time. I did the first volume, Forgers, The Forgers. That was done at Otto's. Then I think Forger's Daughter was done at the Strand bookstore, if I'm not mistaken. And then this is at McNally Jackson. But yeah, no, I'll be down there. Otto and I are really old friends. Otto was my editor on the first 2 volumes, in fact. And
it started as a short story from what I've gathered so far. It started
it was for his, I don't know whether you know his Biblio Mystery series, but it's quite wonderful. And I started working on, I had an idea and it had to do with forgery, and I was writing it, and I got past 60 pages and I thought this is getting kind of long for Otto's format. Then it was at 90 pages when I finally showed it to him, and he said, "My God, this is a book. You got to keep going." And I said, "Well, that's good because I've already had 120 pages at that time.
30 more.
Another one. I'll write you another one." So I did write him another one. I just wrote him a novella called what is it called? It was called The Nature of My Inheritance.
Okay.
Which is about oh gosh, it's been a while since I thought of it. It's about a reverend who dies, a minister who dies, and he collected Bibles, and he gave all the Bibles to his son, who was not a very religious guy. And the kid thought, well, this is just the kid, he wasn't a kid, he's in his 20s, but he thought this is a burden to me. He's doing this to spite me. But he opens up one of the Bibles, and sure enough, it's one of those where he'd hollowed out the inside, and inside are a number of wildly valuable rare books that he had stolen. That he had stolen, or somehow by different means he has them in his library. So they're worth a fortune. I'll let the story tell us.
Yeah, you're already going back to Gentle Madness again.
Yeah, well, I remember my editor at my former editor, who published Gentle Madness, Henry Holt, I think, right? Holt. Anyway, Alan Peacock, who's a bookman also. I remember Alan personally handing me a first edition of Gentle Madness, which is, it's back in there somewhere. By the way, the outside this room is a whole library. It just goes all the way down.
Don't say that. I'm going to make you give me a tour. You're going to bring the computer. You're going to bring the computer with you.
I'd have to. That'd be difficult to do. So, he said, "You're going to love this book." And I read it, sat right down, went home, read it, and I just loved that book. But yeah, so The Forgers turned into a novel, and was having lunch with Otto, and he said, it's done so beautifully, it sold all these foreign countries, and you know, he said, you should do another one. And I thought, well, I'm in the middle of a very long novel called The Prague Sonata, which also was published by Grove Atlantic. And it's about a musical manuscript. It's all sort of the last four books I've written have had a lot to do with whether musical manuscripts or literary manuscripts and books. The Prague Sonata is about a lost 18th century manuscript that was divided into three parts. It was a sonata divided into three parts to keep it away from the Nazis looting it. And so a woman many years later discovers one of the manuscripts of the sonata up in the Bronx, or Queens actually. And
Can you divulge where she acquired that? Was it a
yeah, her husband Jakub had owned it. Her name's Ottilie, and Jakub had owned it, and her husband had owned it. No, she was the best friend of the husband and wife, and had fled Prague when the Nazis rolled in 39. And so her copy went to America. And so our sort of our protagonist, Meta Taverner, wants to put the whole thing back together again. And so it sends her on quite a worldwide goose chase to find the other manuscripts. She winds up in Prague, Nebraska. and the whole thing is finally put together. And I'm not going to name who the composer is, but it's a major piece by a composer. It was really, and I had gotten a Guggenheim Fellowship to finish that book. And I told Otto at the time, I said, I can't do another Forgers book until I finish this novel. And so, sure enough, when I finished that, I started right in on Forger's Daughter, knowing that having a sense of it wasn't going to be a diptych. It really needed to be a trilogy.
Right.
So I've made notes as I went along.
Right. So the sonata is about three. The Forgers is a trilogy. I mean, we have this three popping up. Is this something in your subconscious we need to talk about?
I hadn't thought of that, but you're not wrong. Actually, my first novel that was really, I would consider, I got done everything I set out to do as far as I could at the time. It was called Trinity Fields. It was about
this conversation this conversation may take a left turn to the number three, and we're going to really get into it deeply. We're going to go down some rabbit holes. Very interesting to think that way too. I want to get more into the forgery and where those ideas stem from, but you've had such a phenomenal journey. And I want to go back, and you know where I'm going to go as soon as I say this date. I want to go back to 1966, because you definitely have a worldview. And I think a lot of that worldview at least begins to blossom in 1966. Can you talk about that journey as a very young man who's about to embark on a life-changing adventure?
Yeah, well, I was growing up in Denver, Colorado, and then in Littleton, Colorado, long before the days of school shootings and all that. And I had wanted to be a doctor because my grandfather, who I love very much, Dr. Ernest Morrow. Ernest, he added an L's in the middle of his name, so it'd spell a tree. Ernest L. Morrow. He was a character, but I really wanted to be a doctor too. So I applied for and got this Amigos de las Americas, I guess you could say, scholarship, where I was one of 20 or 22 American teens who went to Central America to work basically as medical assistants. We had training to how to do inoculations and things like hygiene and so forth and so on. I had a crash course in Spanish, and so I wound up in Honduras, and not only in Honduras, but in very rural Honduras along the Nicaraguan border. And
But you're also a teenager at this time.
oh yeah, no, I was
Yeah, let's
I think
showcase
I was
that.
15, I think I was.
15 years old.
Yeah.
So you wanted to be a doctor, and this is like going to college before you're thinking
Yeah.
about going to college.
Yeah, and it was a life changer because I saw real poverty. It was
Right.
Honduras was the second poorest nation in the hemisphere. I think the poorest was Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
It was when you get that, when it's that impoverished, it's a shade of difference. And I just saw all sorts of things that I found very difficult to come back home
Right.
and see all my high school friends. And at that point, and my girlfriend, I'm sorry if she's, I doubt she'll ever hear this, but they didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
I was radicalized. I was thought, well, why are we doing so well when just a matter of 1,000 miles or even less, they're dying of poverty, and they have
Right.
little kids have
Yeah.
3 different types of worms, and there's
Okay.
no running water and all this. So I couldn't do my senior year. I was in Littleton, Colorado. I just couldn't take it. So I applied for an American Field Service scholarship, and I wound up in Italy. And growing up, my family weren't big readers. They just weren't. My father, you mentioned modern library earlier. That my dad had like a handful of modern library books from when he went to college, including an Emerson, which I took off his hands. He wasn't going to read it. And so I went from like a home with no books, just some National Geographics and a broken set of Dickens that my mom wouldn't let me touch, which is on the mantle. And I wound up in a home in Cuneo, Italy, way up north, with a woman professor and her husband and their 3 lovely children, all boys at the time. And she had a whole library full of Penguin paperbacks of English, British, you know, American world literature.
Right.
I was suddenly just, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a soul opening situation for me. I just started reading books.
Mm.
I made up for in a year there in Italy while learning Italian, which I did learn quite well, and having friends and a girlfriend and all this sort of stuff. She and I are still friends. My mother, my host mother, is still alive. She's deep in her 90s, and we correspond. And I credit her for allowing me into her library and into their lives. And so then I came back, and I was everything else in the rest of my life was literature, books, music too, because I was a musician as well. But I really finally settled in, and I loved painting. Interested in all the arts, but at a certain point, you just have to,
But it's almost like through happenstance, the doorway to your future life had opened up right there and then in Italy.
yeah. Well, it really opened up. Oddly enough, you bring it up, and it opened up in Honduras. Where I didn't see one book in Honduras. I mean, there was a copy of Rubber Soul by the Beatles that some kid had with a crank record player, which of course you could only listen to it in the day or at night, because they would turn off the power somewhere. There's like the electricity was only available at certain times of days. But I would listen to Rubber Soul. But no, the depredation I saw in Honduras,
Right.
and me being so disgusted when I came back, or whatever the word you want to use, and then winding up in Italy, and then suddenly being in a library that was all orange.
Right. But I also want to take a highlighter here for a second. This is the mid to late 60s. The Vietnam War is going on.
Oh yeah.
And so I just feel like you're in this blender with all this stuff going on. You're still traveling around the world to these other war zones, more or
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
but there's another war being fought in your at your home
Yeah,
expense in another country.
yeah, I was an anti-war activist when I was in Italy. This would be 68, I guess, or not, somewhere in there, right in the thick of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, Trinity Fields is about, the atom bomb, and it's set in Los Alamos, New Mexico, mostly, but also Vietnam War, and in particular, the covert war we were waging in Laos, because I befriended some men who were called the Ravens, and I'm actually an honorary Raven, which I would never have been able to do what they did, but
Mhm.
they were very kind to me and like let me into their lives, and I could write about it. But yeah, no, I was a protester, and I was knocked down in Paris in a protest. It was then I applied for conscientious objector, rather than
That is sure.
and they were very wonky about it in the embassy in Torino. They shamed me. They said, "This is just so un-American of you. We may have to take your visa away." And they threatened me, openly threatened me. And
What was this because of the draft, and you thought you were going to get drafted at because this is you're like
yes,
this is the height of the Vietnam War now.
oh yeah, I was very
Yeah.
possibly gonna get drafted. So I applied for as a conscientious objector, and I I had every right to do that.
Mhm.
And I think I was about to be approved, but then they had the lottery, and
Right.
I drew, lucky me, I drew a high number. But I would not have gone to Vietnam. I would have stayed in Italy, or I would have something, whatever would have happened to me. Jimmy Carter would have, didn't he kind of redress the situation with everybody who was a draft dodger, where he gave them a pass.
Well, that yeah, that in the he was president from 76 to 80. And
Right.
yeah, there was a yeah, he definitely was trying
He
to.
pardoned everybody, as no, and then I came back and I did a year back at college, and then I was playing a lot of music, and I fell in love with a woman who was a artist, and so she sold her Harley Davidson, and I sold my guitars.
This is the
and,
beginning, the first line of your next novel is coming out right now.
and we moved to Paris for a year till the money ran out. Then I
Yeah.
went back, and it goes on and on from there. But you know, selling my guitars, they were beautiful guitars, and I loved them dearly. And one of them is in Stephen Still's collection, so unless he probably moved it on by now. But it was great times, and then learning French and reading again, and really starting to try to write. Uh,
Mhm.
that's what happened in Paris. I was just 50 years too late to be part of it.
So what writers at that time, because you're coming off of that beautiful collection in Italy of books, I'm sure you just voraciously read and reread, and
Yeah.
all of those authors opened up new authors to you. Who was inspiring you to become that writer you were destined to become?
Okay. I was reading a lot of British novelists of the 19th century. I really fell in love with Thomas Hardy, and I can't help myself. Friends say, but his poetry is better than the prose. And I said, well, I can't literally do without, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and
Far from the madding crowd.
yeah, Far with the Men in Crowd, and oh gosh, the Woodlanders. I really like. Oh my gosh, it's Jude the Obscure, of course.
Mhm.
Anyway, actually, I have a Jude the Obscure in a dust jacket. I'm the only one I know. I'm sure there's others out there, but
You know we're going to get into that real soon too. We're not.
it's just well, I can't. I have a hard time divvying this out in my head, but yeah. So I think it was Honduras that got me started, and then Maria Teresa del Piano's library. And I came
And
back.
so
Oh, and then I started reading more contemporary. I was really reading a lot of oh my gosh, Ovid.
Mhm.
uh,
So
Deep
you weren't really reading modern writers then. You were reading the classic authors of the century before. And so
centuries even.
yeah,
But
so
I'll tell you what, I spent a month and a half reading a Shakespeare play a day, like some of them bled into 2 days. But
yeah.
it was when I picked up William Gaddis's The Recognitions. that was when I thought to myself, you can do this with a novel. I was bowled over by his language, by his, and it came out in 1955, and he got the just terrible, atrocious reviews. It's overwrought. It's too long. It's all the complaints. Sometimes I get those complaints, and it makes me feel like a badge of honor. It doesn't bother me, but he was the real inspiration to me. But a whole number of very different kinds of writers also have inspired me among modern writers, more contemporary writers. I love Angela Carter. I think she's just the most fabulous writer, and I have a beautiful collection of her. But even before I could afford to buy any rare books of hers, I was devoted to her short stories. Willa Cather is another writer, because my mother was born in Red Cloud, Nebraska, which is Willa Cather's, that's where she grew up. And so it turns out my family actually were friends with the Cathers. So I even own a copy of Death Comes from the Archbishop, the illustrated edition, but it's inscribed to my great aunt by Cather. So yeah, Cather, Carter, it just moves out from there. I was very moved by the postmodernists like Hawks, William Gass,
John Hawkes you're referring to?
John Hawkes, yeah. They all became close friends. He introduced me at my first public reading. John Hawkes did. And there was Bob Coover, sitting in the front row with his arms crossed, and I thought, oh man, this is the deep end of the pool.
You jumped right in.
Yeah, yeah, and so conjunctions all is part of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Let's get into conjunctions too, because
okay.
that's where I first knew your name.
Oh,
In the 90s, I was writing short stories and sending to literary magazines. Back then, you had to put about 97 worth of stamps on it and a SASE, and how the world has changed. Um, you've published such phenomenal writers in your time with conjunctions. What was it like to go through? I think a lot of writers are interested in this. What was it like to go through a batch of stories on a week? If you take a bunch of stories home, and you come across a writer that you've never heard of, but you're just taken. I'm
what's
sure
that
that
like?
happened. I'm sure it happened so many times to you for as long as conjunctions has been around.
Yeah. No, I mean I published 2,000 writers, so it's happened a lot, and it's a kind of a drug almost, that whole business of finding something that you didn't know was there. You were looking for it, I guess, but you weren't really looking for it. And then to hear somebody with a voice that, like, where'd that come from? Who is this person?
Yeah.
Oh, I have more stories than we have time for. But it feels great, is what it feels like, because I don't like rejecting people's work, because it's so hard to write even a bad short story. It's so hard to write any kind of a poem. It's so hard to write, period. It's so hard to investigate yourself and bring the language you have to work with to the fore, and make this whatever this magical fusion of imagination and the framework of the language we have to work with or not work with, if you want to move beyond language,
And
whatever.
our experiences and put it all together. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to do. And so every time I send a rejection card, and we have 14 or 15 readers for conjunctions. I can't keep up with all of it myself, but they all have a very similar aesthetic, I think, and they all have a similar respect for unsolicited manuscripts. It's called the slush pile.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I really kind of hate that term. It's really it's the gold mine, is what it is. And when you pull up something, I had a whole stack of them back here. I just took them off the desk to unclutter the place a little bit before we got on. But I have, when we get off, I'll probably read some manuscripts this afternoon for a while, and it's just a feeling of exploration. And after all these years, when the time comes that I'm not interested in reading through the unsolicited,
Right.
then conjunction should come to a halt. That should be the end of it. We're in a phase right now because Bard College, who's been our wonderful publisher for 35 years, is coming to an end with conjunctions. Our contract is up, and so we're raising money to try to keep conjunctions going. So we're at least a fall issue, conjunctions 85. And we're doing well so far, but we're gonna, we're reaching out everywhere to try to raise money to do this. It's a 501c3.
Does it have to remain at Bard, or can it go to a new
No,
home?
it won't be able to remain at Bard anymore.
Is done with it.
Bard is done. And
Yeah.
there's no bitterness in my heart about it because I don't know of another institution who would have kept it going for 35 years like that. And I had done a decade even before then. So, it's had a long run. But we have a new website, if you don't mind me saying that on here.
I want you to promote everything you want to promote, and I definitely want to give love to the short story writers and the poets who publish in literary magazines. They
So do I.
they are so deserving and so underrepresented in popularity. They need a lot of love.
Well, so the new website is conjunctions.com.
And I'll throw that down in the link for us as well after the
Okay, yeah, that's brilliant. It's a brand new website. We spent 2 years designing it, and it'll be the website that'll go forward into the future. And we may just be publishing online. I don't know what's going to happen with conjunctions, but I want to keep it going. That's for sure. So yeah, and I'm retiring from teaching. You had mentioned earlier that before we got on that you had retired from teaching after this. So I'm going to be professor emeritus as of June, and so who knows what happens next? But
well, you were a professor of college, and I was a high school teacher. So
hey, look, they're both important. Come on.
Oh yes, but I was sitting there at year 15, going, I got 15 more years of this. I don't know if I can make it.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think you've done okay.
oh, I mean, books have changed. Selling books and collecting books and getting into the marketplace has changed my life in a way that those the paperbacks in Italy changed your life. The used book market and selling used books changed my life. So you don't expect it.
Talking about books and education, you can't get a better education than working at a bookstore.
Oh,
In particular, a used bookstore.
here you go. In the 90s, here's a picture of this is and this is actually, it was a 3-story bookstore, but this is actually where I first met Nick Bazabanes. He came in the shop.
Oh, I love it. Where is that?
This was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The name of the store was Robert A. Hiddle Bookseller. And this is the second floor right there. That's the rare book room. But there was a floor above that as well. But I remember Nick coming in 1996, fresh off Gentle Madness. And we were talking, and I knew who he was because of the great popularity of that book in 95. And so when I interviewed Nick last week, I had to remind him that we knew each other going back to 1995, and he couldn't believe it.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
What is that? An antelope there? What was that?
Yeah. There was an antelope head. Yeah, we had it. And then there's a fish over there.
Oh yeah.
We had some taxidermy on the shelves, but this was you would have loved it. It was it was like a New England bookstore, 3 stories, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
I don't think I know a bookshop I don't love. I mean, any
That's
bookshop,
true.
I think a bibliophile, if you're a real bibliophile or a bibliomaniac like you, me, and Nick are, or I am, you just love bookstores. Or anywhere, if you walk into an antique store, you're drawn to see the books. And there was a recent article, I think a couple days ago, in the New York Times about why do old books smell like vanilla? And I thought, I don't know what books this person is smelling, but I'm smelling red rot half the time.
Yeah, it's
Not in my place.
A little bit of mold, a little bit of water damage and mold too. But
yeah, it's maybe that Yates set back there smells like vanilla. I'm not gonna put my nose in it, but Yeah, no, bookshops are great, and the more kind of it used to even be a little bit more fun before the internet, because you would go into places where they would have a book there they've had for many years, and it's just the chance of discovering something was there. It's the same thing with going through manuscripts or conjunctions. There's like a discovery up ahead, and
Yeah.
that's part of the great joy. I bought a book at an auction at Heritage a couple of weeks ago from the Struts collection, I think three, and I bought a copy of Sir Thomas Browne's Pseudodoxia Epidemica, which is the book I had in my 20s, and sold it because I probably need to make rent. But
Right.
I found another one, and this guy William Struts, who was one of the great collectors of his generation, I open up the box, and beautiful copy, contemporary sprinkled calf, and all that kind of good stuff. And he had his notes in there for when he received it in 1966 from, I want to say, Seven Gables bookshop, but it was an old bookshop. And I thought, this book, even granted it's late 18th, 17th century, but it hasn't been out in the market since what, for 70 years, something like that. And I thought, you know, this is the kind of discovery you just makes me so happy. Just that has the whole story there. And Struts had written kind of notes about how excited he was when he ordered it, and he said,
Oh, so there was some great marginalia in there, and
not in his. He wrote it on a separate piece of paper.
oh, okay, and put it okay.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to say how much you paid for that, but were there several bidders on that book?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
So you were
Yeah, no, I mean, Sir
crossing your
Thomas.
fingers. You were crossing your fingers on that one.
Yeah, you never know when things are gonna just go through the roof, and you're left
Right.
there thinking like, oh my gosh. And then there are some times when the room goes still, or the online goes quiet, and I don't know, maybe everybody stepped out to get a glass of water or whatever, bless their hearts, and then you wind up with it. So, or there's interest in something else, or people, who knows? It's just,
Yeah,
I love auctions.
I just sold some books at Doyle's auction near you probably,
Yeah.
and I would I was very shocked. I don't like to get too involved in sweating it out, so I don't even follow it.
Yeah.
But every time I've dealt with an auction house, things have gone very well. So it's an exciting process, and I think I said this to you earlier. The marketplace is definitely changing now.
Mhm.
It changed in the mid '90s with the advent of the tour de forces of eBay and Amazon coming to the forefront of the
Mhm.
internet, and I feel like it's changing again. I think you and I discussed a little bit about a platform called Whatnot earlier, which is a live bidding site, and I think this is really the direction of what's going on. Even though we have large auction houses like Heritage and Doyle's and Sotheby's and
Mhm.
Christie's, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of smaller houses now using the internet to sell their items.
Mhm. Well, I think during the pandemic, in particular, a lot of people had time at home, so they started looking at their book collections and maybe cataloging them and just sorting out what they want to get rid of. And like, I don't need this anymore, or I would really love to fill in the rest of this collection or whatever. And everybody was doing it online. So I think there was a marker there in how
There is.
books were bought and sold because of the pandemic. You couldn't really go out in bookshops
Mhm.
for the most part. So I do think that drove book buying and book selling
Yeah.
to the internet more than ever before.
Yeah, I had more online sales in that sort of 18-month period than I had any of other time.
I
And
think your story is not unusual. I think
yeah, it
yeah.
it was insane. And that actually was the marking point for me to make the decision to retire from teaching and do this full
Mhm.
time. So it definitely was a marking point for me.
Mhm.
Um, how long have I know you're a bibliophile, we've talked about it, but how long have you been an active collector or an active hunter of great literature and fine editions? And and antiquarian books?
Oh, 50 years at least. I had a bookstore and when I was living in Santa Barbara, California. So I left Yale on a Danforth fellowship, and they made the mistake of giving me a semester's worth of money up front. I found myself over at what was it called? There's a bookshop in New Haven that dealt primarily in 18th century books. C.A. Stonehill was the name of it.
Okay.
And I found myself, well, if we're going to read, uh, or if we're going to read Tom Jones, I ought to be reading it in a first edition. So I didn't have enough money they didn't have a first edition, but they had a second edition. So I went over and bought that. So I read it in the original. And you just get hooked with that sort of thing. I was anyway. Let me look things up on a Johnson's dictionary, you know. So I took a leave of absence from Yale and just never returned, and wound up in Santa Barbara, California, working for a guy named Maurice Neville, who
Okay.
had inherited a whole bunch of money, and he bought a collection from, I think, the Weinsteins, Lou Weinstein, at Heritage Bookshop. And it was oh gosh, what's the name of the collector? He's very famous for his condition. He would buy books when they came out in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Put them away.
Then he'd wrap them in paper and put them in a box, and he kept them. So when we were opening up these boxes, Maury had just bought this from Lou, and there was me and another guy, from New York. And we were tasked with pricing all this stuff, and like we were in a time capsule though, so there's no internet at the time
Give me a year. We need a year for this.
Okay, this was 78, 9,
Okay.
77 through probably 81, somewhere in
All right.
there.
Okay. So now you're in Santa Barbara, California, and you are opening up boxes of books that have been wrapped in paper. The Hemingways, the Fitzgeralds, the Dorothy Parkers. I
All
mean,
of it, all of it.
give me. I mean, that. Have you not written about this, for crying out loud? I mean,
Yeah, I know.
unbelievable.
What an experience. Another
Yeah.
deep into the pool kind of thing. I was thrown in the very deep end. So there was an opening. I have to remember this gentleman's name. It was Norman Unger is his name.
Okay.
And I still see Norman Unger copies floating around in pristine condition with my handwriting in the back with the cost
With the
code.
price, yeah.
If it's ever an Unger copy, it's going to be in pristine condition, unless,
Right.
in the meantime, I've had 50 years to deteriorate. But so I priced all this stuff. Peter Howard from Serendipity, the whole West Coast came in and bought a lot of books. And my problem was I just wasn't used to working for somebody. So John Martin of Black Sparrow Press.
Wow. Okay.
John was kind of my mentor at the time. He had published a bibliography I had written on Wyndham Lewis, and
Okay. Oh, okay. So that makes sense with Black Sparrow because they published so much Wyndham Lewis. Yeah.
they after I turned him on to Wyndham
Okay.
Lewis. Yeah.
Wow, this is great. Okay.
Yeah. So John knew I was not happy working with with Neville, and so I was able to borrow enough money to buy a collection of also a really beautiful collection of books, and was signed, Tennessee Williams and all kinds of good stuff. So I did a catalog. I started buying books, and I just got started.
You were doing this out of an apartment in Santa Barbara. You were making a stapled catalog.
Yeah, I tell you what. Well,
you got to send me an early copy of that.
I wish I hadn't. I did a catalog of John Steinbeck.
Okay.
And that catalog is actually collected. I see it online for I don't know what happened with my resolution, but I hope you can. Do I look okay?
You're fine. You're fine. But you're going to be a little shocked when I tell you this, only because I do this all the time as a living. Vintage book catalogs. There's a collector's market for that.
Oh yeah.
It's almost a degree of provenance.
Well, Tom Congleton at Between the Covers, he collects first catalogs.
Okay.
So he definitely has my first catalog. And I think I did about 12 or 13 catalogs before I finally started Conjunctions, left Santa Barbara, moved to New York City, and but I've never stopped, you know, dealing rare books, buying and selling rare books, you know, helping people with archives and things. I've never really gotten fully out of it. So, you know, I'm looking at my retirement coming up, and I'm going to spend most of my time writing books and other things. But, you know, once you've had that
Uh-huh.
experience of being a bookseller,
You say it. You're preaching to the choir now.
and it's exactly, it's a joy, you know, it's a joy, and you meet really interesting people and people who, you know, who are like-minded, are similarly infected with
In
this
fact, yeah,
disease.
affected a gentle madness, as Nick
A
would say, of
gentle, yeah,
course. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So,
So you're not a seller now, though. You're I would have to guess just a collector at this point. I mean, there'll come a time when the books get sold, but you're really collecting, correct?
well, no, I'll sell to dealers from time to
Okay.
time. You know, I won't name names, but there's a few dealers who sneak in there around.
Because they're asking for something that you may have or you mentioned in conversation.
Yeah, I would get I guess, well, they come by and they see the collection, and
Oh,
then, you
okay.
know, if you're a good, one thing you have to be, if you're a good bookseller, is you have to have a real bear trap of a memory.
Yeah.
So you know, I got a call one day from somebody saying, you know, you still have that set of 1984s with the wraparound bands? And I said, yeah. I said, well, would you sell the red one? And I said, no, but no, I'm not going to sell the red. I'll sell you the green one.
It's funny. They're coming to your domicile and they're talking to you, but you know their eyes are looking at the shelves above you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're looking right over your shoulder, scanning. Nice to see you, Brad. Nice to see you. No,
What is that over there?
I have a few friends I buy and sell from, and we trade and we do things like that. But you know, this would involve probably well, I know what I would have to do, and involve a website and all that. But
Right.
I do have I do have books where I've upgraded copies, and you know, I have enough overstock and have a whole bunch of books in my place upstate as well. So it might be kind of fun. We'll see. This is an idea I'm kicking around.
What is on your collection? Is there parameters of what you're really looking for as you collect, or could it be anything of high value that just touches your heart?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The answer would be so ranging, because I have a lot of interests,
Yeah.
a lot of interests, but I'm really interested in sort of unique copies of things.
Okay.
I like association copies. I'm very
Oh,
much of a condition freak.
okay.
That was the Santa Barbara way, you know, when we were called the Santa Barbarians. It was me and Maurice F. Neville and Ralph Sipper, who is still there and still active, and you know, few other dealers in the little town of Santa Barbara. We are all very attuned to condition, probably because of Norman Unger to some degree. And Ralph has a good sense of condition, the value of condition. But I like books that are, but I go from sort of 18th through 20th century. So and if I get started on something, like my,
Does it have to be a signed copy? Can it just be a first edition and near
if
fine
it
condition?
if it's a rare book to find in nice condition, or certainly in dust jacket,
Sure.
I can happily do without a signature.
Okay.
If it's, I tend not to buy a signed book that is in crummy shape, unless, see, there's always these unlesses, these caveats. But
You're such a book dealer.
unless it's a really important association copy, then you just, you know,
Explain that to the viewers, please, what you mean by association copy.
okay, so an association copy is a copy that's inscribed by the author to someone who is very close to them in their life, whether it's a family member or a fellow writer at the time who, you know, or the greatest association copy often is the dedication copy, which means the person you've dedicated the book to, you're only going to inscribe one of those to them. But for instance, I have a copy of a Ford Maddox Ford book, Mr. Bosphorus's, what is it called? And it's described by Ford to Joseph Conrad. And so
Wow.
there's a good association.
That's an inscription for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only because they're both famous writers, but because they co-wrote a few books together. So they were actually collaborated on The Inheritors and a couple other books. And so I know that Conrad wasn't quite as much in love with Ford as Ford was with Conrad, because Conrad got quite crusty in his later years. That's the other thing about being a bookseller. You really need to know the biographies, and it's just, what more could you ask? I mean, if you're a book person, it's just like everything is just, you learn all the time from books. I do anyway. I've gotten more into bindings and things, and also some fine press books. I bought the Ashendene Don Quixote recently, and first of all, you have to find a place to put it because it's so darn big. But things like that, or if you see things that shouldn't be in great condition somehow, but they are. Those always interest me a lot. Children's books in great condition. I don't collect children's books as such, but I recently bought a copy of where is it? It's not in grabbing distance of Hans Christian Andersen.
Okay.
The first complete collected in English out of the Danish, and it's inscribed by nobody that we have ever heard of, but it's inscribed for, I'll say, Arnold Pumpernickel something or other.
Do you remember the illustrator on that edition?
This was the one that came out before the illustrator.
Okay.
The illustrated edition came a year after.
So you got, yeah.
It's in the original sort of purple dun cloth, and there's a frontispiece drawing or engraving of Hans Christian Andersen, and he has a face like a shovel. He's just a very long, spooky face. Anyway, but it's inscribed to this kid with all of mama's love, And I'm thinking to myself, I showed it to a friend of mine, and she said, "Well, what happened to this poor kid? Why is this in such great shape? He never read it."
Read it, yeah.
And I said, so now you can spin stories if you're a story spinner like I can be. And you think, well, did he die after the inscription, or did mom would not let him touch it? Like my mother wouldn't let me touch that Dickens that I mentioned before, or, what's the backstory there? But, every book is its own story.
Well, you make me think that there needs to be a novel about each chapter is the owner of a book, the same book, and how it goes through the generations, and from a family member to a garage sale to a new owner, and on and on and on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea.
I remember there was a
You
story.
should write that.
Yeah. Those days are far over, unfortunately.
Well, you should get them back up and going again. There's no reason.
Yeah, there was a story many years ago, a short story, I believe it was by Julian Barnes, in the history of the world in 10 and a half chapters.
Yeah.
And the narrator was an earthworm aboard Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to have the narrator be the book and tell all about its journey. So that's interesting.
You're just developing this novel right in front of our eyes here.
Let's call Otto and see if we can get something going on.
Well, that would involve a murder.
Yeah.
I suppose, and I don't want to murder this little boy whose mama loved him so much. She bought him this wonderful book, but it's pretty much pristine. So
was this a book you were looking for, though, or did you happen upon it?
It happened upon me.
I love that. I love that.
I wasn't looking for Hans Christian Andersen that day,
Yeah.
and a lot of times I'll see something and it's like, what? And then other times I'll see things that are like, well, that's a good price, but it's I don't buy, and I probably would be, and I'm sure most people do. I try not to buy if it's just a low price on a book that you'll be sure to find elsewhere.
Right. Well, and that's what the internet has done. That's what eBay and Amazon's done. Back in your Santa Barbara days
Mhm.
back in the 90s for me, if you had, we'll just say a copy of Moby Dick illustrated by Rockwell Kent, that was a rare book back then. Uh,
Yeah,
you could find it, but you still had to dig to find it, maybe through a catalog like you were putting out.
yeah.
Now with eBay and all the other platforms, that's not a rare book anymore, and you could probably find 200 copies right now available.
Yeah, but not in pristine condition because
No,
then
I know you're a condition hawk. We know.
I have a sad story for you, and I won't name the auction house, but
Okay.
a Midwestern auction house had a pristine copy, and
I
the
already know. I already know.
you know the book,
No, I know the auction house already.
and they it was an immaculate copy.
Uh-huh.
They said they probably the finest copy in existence, which is probably not true, but it was maybe true at the time. But when they were packing it, they somebody dropped it.
Oh,
Oh God. The many ways a book can become a rare book, is are just countless. Dropping it, spilling, you're celebrating with your glass of a cognac, but you're celebrating your new purchase of some rarity, and like you spilled a cognac on it. Makes that book even rarer, but other copies, not that copy.
now they dropped this book. Did the boards break? Did they just dent the boards?
The top of the spine was crumpled and crushed, and the crown of the spine was torn up here. Oh, the crown of the
Oh,
spine was torn.
that's a beautiful copy right there too.
Oh, I have this out because
Is that the Lattimore?
yeah,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. Look at that. I have this. I got this out because I just got yesterday a
Okay.
proof of the Daniel Mendelsohn Odyssey, which is this is 60 in the 60s.
Mhm.
And this is coming out like next month, I think.
Yeah, I just
And
sold a copy of the Lattimore. You're gonna die when I tell you this. I just sold a copy of the Lattimore. I found it at a flea market for $1 with a
right.
dust jacket. How that book survived with a dust jacket and made it to a Fort Lauderdale flea market is amazing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, look at the jacket. It's a beautiful design,
Yeah.
Mike.
Oh yeah, it's a gorgeous jacket. Yeah.
And that's the kind of copy I like to see.
Hmm.
Who designed this thing anyway? Alice Eichelberger. I don't know, very interesting. But this is this is University of Chicago, this one. And so is Daniel Mendelssohn's, who's a colleague of mine at Bard. And they sent it to me, and they say here, in 61, the University of Chicago Press published Richmond Lattimore's translation of Homer's The Iliad. For more than 60 years, it has served to introduce readers to the ancient Greek world, blah, blah, blah. And it said, Chicago never published a companion translation of the best-known epic in the Western canon, the Odyssey, until now. So those two books, when this comes out, they make a nice set. They're not going to go anywhere, but I started reading it yesterday. It's a fabulous translation. It's just, oh my gosh.
Well, I want to keep going, but I know I got to keep it at an hour.
Okay.
We're right on there. I'm going to ask you a question that I haven't asked anybody so far in your episode 23. And I mean, I just feel like we're both plunging into our brains in this conversation. So I'm
Mhm.
going to ask you something. Is there a novel? Is there a novel out there that's has been forgotten about that you feel like people need to find this author and read this book? I mean, I have my sort of few that I like to recommend, but is there one that you recommend that you feel like it just, maybe it had a little brief popularity and died, or never it was published and just never really came to fruition in the marketplace?
Hmm. That's it. There are many.
Well, I'm going to give you mine then to help you. I'm going to give you mine to help
Okay.
your brain going. Mine is Dalton Trumbo's Johnny Got His Gun.
Yeah. I've
Very,
never.
very, yeah,
There
yeah.
we are.
But it's a forgotten book, and people forget about Trumbo's life as well, which was for movies as well. But so that's one of the ones that I really like to recommend to people.
Well, mine may be too, I have several, but mine may be too obvious of one. And I'm sure the moment we're done with this,
You're going to call me again and say, don't forget
I'll
this.
be shooting you an email with a long list. But I wonder if enough people have actually read Death Comes for the Archbishop, and not just my Antonia,
Mhm.
but Death Comes for the Archbishop, The Professor's House, and later one of ours by Willa Cather.
Okay.
I think in a way Virginia Woolf was taken really good care of in terms of her reputation and her in England in a way that we have never taken care of Willa Cather. Cather is just she's considered a kind of well, she got that Pulitzer Prize for, but she didn't go to the war in World War
And there's
One.
always a story in an anthology of American fiction that you read.
Sure,
Yeah.
she's around and about, but
Yeah.
if one wants to make a really um, a study of Willa Cather, I think starting with Alexander's Bridge and going through the obvious ones like My Antonia and
I
one.
love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Look at us talking about Trumbo and Cather. I love it
yeah,
on a
yeah.
Sunday afternoon. Does it get better?
It does not get better than that. I mean, I think probably Willa Cather is one of our. She's not forgotten. She's revered. All this kind of stuff. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not breaking news to anybody that Willa Cather. I have to write that down. But I
Yeah.
think to give Death Comes for the Archbishop and to understand her as one of our first actual. I'm going to use the dirty word postmodernists. She was a true modernist. She broke a lot of ground with her work, and the structures, the shapes of her novels can be quite. In I mean, I studied them. They are unusual forms and dynamics, and she tells a story in a way that's different than most anybody. I also think Gaddis. I'll just bring him up again too. I
Of
think
course. Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
back and read, you do yourself a real service reading the recognitions, but maybe don't start with the recognition. Start with Carpenter's Gothic, which was a shorter book. All the other ones are 800 pages. And then J.R. So he's only got four.
Right. Yeah. It's a small body of work, but everything is, and of course you already know this. All of his novels are very highly collectible,
Yeah,
and that you got to pay a pretty penny to buy them now.
to get a nice copy. Yeah, but they're around. They're around. But people don't read them. Is what
No, right. Well, yeah, they look at recognitions and go, how many pages is this? And
I'm going to tell you a story right at the end here, and this is a true story. Partly because of conjunctions, I got to know William Burroughs really well, and Burroughs and I were pretty good friends. He actually even blurred my first novel, if you could believe that, and he read it. But I tried to get him to read the recognitions
Mhm.
because he knew Gaddis from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and he was over once, and I put a copy in it, and he started reading it, and he said, "Oh, Brad, I can't. I just can't." And I said, "Just get through the first 50 pages, and you'll love it." And he said, "Nah, I cannot do it, Brad." And I said, "Well, okay, I tried." But yeah, I think the recognitions. I mean, there are writers who have sort of disappeared too. We could have a whole conversation.
Yeah, I think you and I are going to have to revisit another one of these couple
Sure,
months from now. And we'll talk ahead of time, and we'll try to put more parameters on.
maybe forgotten writers. So
Yeah, I love that idea. I love that idea. I think you and I could have a great episode on that. So we'll come back around in a couple months on that. So let me ask you the last question that I ask everybody. The name of the show is Destination Unknown. Nicholas Bazabane's got me to you. Who am I going to go see next? Who's that going to be episode 24?
I thought about this. I'm giving it some thought, and I thought about Daniel Mendelsohn, that Odyssey. I thought about some booksellers. Um, but there's a gentleman who lives in Boston named Richard Copley, and Copley is about to bring out what is bound to be the definitive biography of Edgar Allan Poe. He is the world's leading Edgar Allan Poe scholar. He is a book collector. He's a book bibliophile. He's an expert on 19th century British and American literature, and he's this novelist to me, this biography of Poe I think it's coming out next month or so.
Beautiful. Good timing then.
It's perfect timing, and I'll tell you, I read it in in a sort of manuscript proof thing, and as I was reading along, all the questions that I had about Poe finally got answered by this wonderful mind and this intense researcher. And the Poe world is a having worked on the first, the second volume was about Edgar Allan Poe's first book, Tamerlane,
Okay.
The Foraging of Tamerlane, and
Here we go again. Yep.
he helped me. He has, I'm sure he has a Poe collection. I'm sure he would be a fascinating person. He's a super smart, and he's really a nice man. And how can you a definitive Poe biography coming out? I'd send you to him.
Thank you. Well, that's going to be phenomenal. Please share some information in an email for me so I
I
can
will.
touch with him. And I want to thank you for just a phenomenal hour of bibliophile and the journey of your life. Just keep in mind and remember the number 3, how important it is. And we discovered it here on this show.
Well, 23.
Yeah, there we go.
There you are. Right?
Boy, we can keep going. And we're going to come back in a couple months, you and I, and maybe we'll do a show on forgotten authors that need a little bit of a highlight from us.
I'd love it.
Thank you very much for your time, Brad, and I appreciate it, and enjoy talking and reading about this.
Thanks so much, Max. Have a good one. See you later.